to give an introduction to Inkscape today. So the basis of why we want to use Inkscape is the problem between vector and raster images. So vector images are based on shapes, so you're manipulating objects, whereas raster images, you're really manipulating pixels one at a time. So for example, this image here where you have a white M on top of a blue circle, if you were to make it bigger or smaller, a raster image would lose quality because you have set pixel sizes depending on how you exported them. And if you wanted to change the raster M into an N, you would have to click a pixel. Well, fundamentally, there's tools to do it, but fundamentally, you'd have to click a pixel and change the color. Whereas for a vector image, because you have a blue circle object and a text object, you can just delete the M, type an N, and that's how you would do it. So a lot of the time, the raster images, the bitmap images, these are used for just like photo editing, whereas vector is really what we want to use for figures and posters to maintain quality. So Illustrator, PowerPoint, and Inkscape, which we're going to talk today, uses vector images, whereas Photoshop will use raster images. So Inkscape is a free and open source graphic editor. It's an alternative to Illustrator. It's not a photo editor, so make sure your photos are edited for like brightness and contrast, etc., before you bring it in. I like it because it's available for most of the operating systems, but keep in mind if you are using a Mac, that the shortcuts are dependent on the control key rather than the command key, so it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around when I'm switching between operating systems. And they have their own very awesome set of tutorials for answering the questions as well. And just a note of where I actually use Inkscape a lot, it's for my figures and my posters. Figures and posters, because I'm sure a lot of you are using PowerPoint right now to make them. And it's easy and simple, and we've grown up with PowerPoint. And Inkscape honestly does take quite a learning curve to get used to and familiar with, but it's so much better. You get a lot more freedom and control over what you do. It's versatile. You can put set dimensions and coordinates. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced it, but PowerPoint crashes on me a lot, especially when I'm using histology images, those really big files. And it's the worst when you open up a PowerPoint file and you just have that big X where you know you had a really nice image there. So Inkscape is better for handling files like that, and it has a really good autosave function for it. And there's a lot of versatility between importing and exporting things. And this is great because it can actually break some of the walls of the proprietary software and the image formats, and you can put them into Inkscape. So now I'm going to move over. There is an SVG file, so everyone should have this. If you could just open the SVG file. So what I was going to do was walk you through how to kind of recreate this figure in my tutorial. So the first thing, so how many people have used Inkscape? Okay, how many people use Illustrator? Okay, cool. So first of all, the overview of what you're looking at here, because it's an open source software, I feel like they tried to cram a lot of different tools into here, so it can look a little bit overwhelming and cluttered. I need to make this, I can't see the bottom right now. You know how I can make this smaller? No. Okay. Oh, right. Oh, my bar is still, wait, can I throw this over? No. Okay, well, you guys will have it. If you hover over one of these, at the bottom right here, you should see a help toolbar. I know you can't see it on the screen right now, but you should be able to see. Huh? Oh, I see it now. There you go. Thank you very much. So this is the main toolbar. So these are the different tools that we will be going through today. And when you have one selected, this is a help bar that will help you kind of learn the tools and let you know what you can do with it. So right now I'm on the select tool. So it says no object selected. You can click something or shift click something. So when I click something, it will tell me more information about, the object that I have clicked. So this is the toolbar for tools. This is a pretty standard kind of like file toolbar. So if you're saving, this is for importing and exporting and grouping things together. So today I kind of want to give you an overview of the tools. I don't expect you to really walk out remembering what everything is, but I want you to know that there's functions available for you when you actually want to go for it. Sorry, that was out of order. But then this second toolbar over here will change according to what tool you have highlighted. So with the select one, we can manipulate the different objects, but if we're drawing a square, we can give it set dimensions and ratios. For the star tool, we can tell how many corners there are. So this second toolbar will change according to what you have clicked and you're using. So with this set, one of the things that I really like about Inkscape is the view. So if you click 5 on your keyboard, that will shortcut and bring you into view for your whole page. And if you click, what is it? Yeah, 4, I believe, it will bring you out to everything that you have. So if you get familiar with the ones that you use a lot, it can be pretty easy for you to just slip around. And one that I use a lot is if you have something highlighted, like if I'm working on a poster and I just want to look at this, if you press 3, it'll zoom into whatever you have selected. So I'm just going to go back to 5, center on this, and then I have it set out to be kind of like a workflow. So if you just scroll down with your mouse, first thing is the interface tool, which I've already started going through. So shortcuts are another really big advantage of Inkscape. So the keyboard is your best friend when you're using Inkscape. So for example, you can see if I'm on the square tool, S for select will bring you back to this mouse tool. And the pen tool is called B for Bezier. So you can see now this is selected. So if I wanted to go back up to here, rather than moving my mouse over to the side, I can press S. Whoops, S. T is for the text tool. N is for notes. So it's a lot to remember. I just want you to know that there's these functions available. So when you find the set of tools that you use the most often, look for the shorthands and it'll help you navigate a lot better rather than going back to the toolbar to change all the time. So the one most of the time you'll want to stay on is the select tool. And another quick shorthand for it is, say you are in another tool. If you just wanted to quickly go to the select tool, you can press space, do whatever you need to do. And then if you press space again, it will return you back to the tool that you were on. And then again, as I mentioned before, Mac, remember to use the actual control key rather than the command key. So next, objects. So what we're going to do now here is kind of recreate this object over here. So we're going to take a square, and we'll draw it out. So we have a rectangle over here. If you wanted to, you could specify the actual dimensions over here. And keep in mind here that you can pick if you wanted to do in pixels or millimeters, what you'd like. So you can see that when the file saved, it remembers the state that it was at last. So last time when I had this file open, I was apparently drawing gray rectangles. So if we wanted to change the color of it, you can see this color toolbar down here. Clicking red will fill it with red. But if you hold shift before clicking something, I can turn the border blue. So you can double check over here in the bottom, the fill and the stroke. So fill is what you're filling your object with. Stroke is the stroke color around it. And it's a little bit washed out because apparently when I was working on this last, I decided to give it opacity. So if you go to Object, Fill and Stroke, you can see that you can actually also bring up this toolbar using the shorthand there. It'll open up a panel on the right side. So I had the opacity down to 30. I probably want a solid color red. For the stroke, you can also change it. And rather than having a really, really tiny border, I'm going to change it to a 1 millimeter border. But if I was trying to replicate that image up there, I would like a white. Oops. If I wanted to replicate that, I want a white inside. So I pressed just white. And then while you have that, hold shift and press the black. And then you can get the black border. Does that make sense? And then when we want to put text in it, you can press for this text tool down here, or you can shorthand just type T, and then figure 1 expression in the small intestine and colon. Okay. So you can also scroll by holding the control key and zoom by holding the control key while you're scrolling. If I wanted, so the other thing I was going to talk about is align and distribute. So these panels pop in and out to help you format specific aspects. If it's taking up too much of your screen, there's this little button over here. If you close it, you can always open it up again. There's no limit to that, but you can just dock this to minimize it, and then this makes it easy for you to open and close it. So the other thing we wanted to do was look at how we can align and distribute these together, because this will make your figures look a lot more clean. So if I wanted to center everything, I'll use the select tool over here, highlight everything, and then align it to the center, like here. Another tip that I've recently found that is useful is most of the time I just want to select all my objects and bring everything to the center, but sometimes you can press last selected. So if you want everything to line up to one object in specific, you can select everything and then select that specific one. And then if you press like align to the bottom, everything will bring it up to that, even if it's not the actual bottom object. But selection area is good. So now that we have that together, you can over here group them together or separate them. So if you do a group, they will now move together. And if you want to separate them, you can separate them with that button. One more thing I also wanted to talk about was copy and paste. So if you Control-C, Control-V, if you zoom in, you can actually tell that the resolution is lost when you do that. So the original one has much higher quality than the second object that we've pasted. And that's because it actually compresses your selection into a JPEG. And that's not what you want, because now you can't edit the font or the text independently of the rectangle. So if you wanted to copy this, you would do Control-D for duplicate. And then that makes another image where another set of them where they are manipulatable independently. So that's very important to keep in mind. Yeah, I think I have set most of those. When you're manipulating things, this is a lock for the aspect ratio. So if you want to, it's kind of like the equivalent of holding, I think, Shift in PowerPoint to make sure that when you make an object bigger or smaller, that the ratios between the height and the width are maintained, so you don't have wonky compression on one of the axes. So, I guess we kind of moved into fill and stroke anyways, but the one thing over here, so if you have a duplicate, or you can bring the original one down as well, if you wanted to mimic the color of this gray, you can make sure you're on the select tool, and then click the rectangle and have that highlighted. If you press D for the dropper tool, you can click the color that you want to duplicate, and then it will bring it over. So just remember the order of events is click the original object, move to the dropper tool, and then click the color you want. And you can actually use this to mimic stroke colors as well. So let me just, if I turn this red. What? Oh, because that's not a real thing. If I turn that red, if I want to change the border of this to red, I'm holding Shift. Wait, so I have the object selected. I move to the dropper tool. I'm holding Shift before I click on it, and then it will force that color that I've selected into the border. One more thing I wanted to mention is for this fill and stroke panel over here, this is awesome for when you're making a big project like a poster and you want to keep your colors consistent. I normally have a document that I jot down my key colors that I'm trying to maintain for my color schemes, because this RGB color code will make sure that all my objects that I want to be the same color are the exact same color. So clip and path is one of the really special things about Inkscape that I love. And this is where we're going to utilize the images that are also in the folder. So I'm just going to clear that up. What we're going to do is import. So this is the import button. Documents. Here, where is it? Whoops. So I'm pretty sure you have this epcam : image. So if you bring it in, when you import an image, you can import pretty much anything, like a picture file, a PDF file, anything. So when you import it, it will drop at the center where your mouse is currently at. So sometimes I use that to navigate where I want it to be. This is a little bit big for what I want. So I'm going to lock the aspect ratio here. I'm going to change this to %, and I want to shrink this by about half. So I'm going to say 50. So that will make it smaller. So this is important when you're working with histology images, because you don't want to be biased towards the size of your objects. So doing this, having this workflow of locking the aspect ratio, shrinking everything by 50 keeps it consistent. And then we normally don't want to show the whole biopsy. We want to draw your attention to a specific part. So I'm clicking on the square tool here. I'm going to draw a square over something that I'm interested in. And normally when I'm doing this, I like to bring back my fill tab and turn the opacity down a little bit so I can see what I am selecting underneath. So say I find these glands really interesting. I can click, so I'm holding Shift to select both of them. So let me get out of that. So if I click one, hold Shift, click the other guy, right click it, and press Set Clip. That will clip out just that little rectangle that was overlapping between them. So I'm just going to duplicate this and my toolbar. Sorry, my toolbar is getting eaten up. Release clip. So then if you have this, I can move it to another space. I mean, I'm sure you probably would do it with another image if you were doing a real figure. But then that's how you can get consistency between your selected images. So I also normally do, yeah, I'm just going to release that. I think that's just a load problem. I keep like a master rectangle over here so that everything gets clipped to the same size. So now I'm going to import the other picture for the small intestine. And I still have the aspect ratio locked, the percentages selected. So I'm going to shrink this one by 50 as well. I'm at this rectangle. I duplicate it, so I Control D, highlight an area that I find interesting, select both of them, set clip. And just because I forgot to duplicate it, 50, and then duplicate, set clip. So now I have 2 biopsies from both. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any troubles with that? Okay. So to get an image that is a little bit nicer and looks like that, we're going to align everything. So they look kind of close, but what we're going to do, we're using this Align and Distribute tab. You can select the 2 on the top and get the top to line up, and the 2 on the bottom, get the bottom to line up. Select the 2 vertically and get the left sides to line up, and then the right sides to line up. So now that looks a lot neater already. When you have these objects selected, then you can form a new cohesive one by grouping them together. And a little bit more just about manipulation in general. If you click it, you can see if you click it again, the arrows change. So when the arrows are in this orientation, it's for you to make the objects bigger or smaller. So because I already have it locked, I don't need to worry about holding down the Shift key to maintain the aspects between them. But if I click it again and get the arrows to the rotation one, this is how I can like rotate it freely on the axis. And Inkscape is really awesome about it as well because you can change the center of rotation. So if you wanted to do something weird and rotate on a different axis, you have the freedom and power to do so. Cool. Okay. So another really important tool in Inkscape is the pen and the Bezier tool. It's a little bit intimidating. There's a lot to learn about it, but it's really, really useful. So the Bezier tool is this blue pen over here. So I'm going to select it. Sorry, it's on a weird default, but click this one first. There's different modes depending on what kind of lines you want to draw. Generally, you're going to be on the first one. So if you just play around with it, you click to anchor down the starting point, and then every click afterwards, you get a straight line. And when you're done drawing your line, just double click. The other ones, you can see that they are defaulting to different curves of the line. So this one will make sure that everything is all nice and curvy. And you can also play around with the tip so you can triangle in and out. Oh. Yeah, so it wisps out, but it wasn't thick enough to really show you. But the important thing about the Bezier tool is the ability to kind of manipulate what is a hard angle and what is a soft angle. So if you just do random clicks, everything is a hard angle. Oh, sorry, let me change this back to none. But it also has ability, when you click and you hold without releasing, you can pull to make a nice curve. So I'm just going to terminate that. And Inkscape also allows you, if you go up here, this is a node button. This is where you drop the second anchor, and you can redefine where the curve of your line goes. So if you're trying to trace an object or just make a new object, there's a lot of freedom to it. So this is where I'm going to ask you to open up the, where was it? There was the other folder. Oh, this one, the pen tool. There's another SVG file. Sorry, I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. It will take a bit to get used to. This works page was meant for Illustrator. So in this box, I've kind of tried to translate the Illustrator into the Inkscape tools. shortcuts. So for example, I'll scroll in here. This is to help you get more familiar with the Bezier tool. So with the Bezier tool, you can click to make this, oops, make sure to change your mode up here. You can click and just follow along to make this little Christmas tree. Oh, and when it says, I guess I'm not a really good reader. So when it says hold down shift, it'll, shift actually is control because that one's for Illustrator. It will restrict the angles. So when you're trying to make a set degree, so you can get a prettier tree. And then this will help you get a little bit more familiar with the tool. So if I'm pressing down, pulling out, and then dropping an anchor here, pressing down, pulling out, releasing, moving down, press down, pull out, release. Press down, pull out, release. Yeah. And you could press enter to finish your stroke. So if you make when you have time, if you make your way through this exercise page, it'll get you a lot more familiar with what you want to do with a pen tool. So this is really awesome when you're trying to make like those graphical abstracts. And you want like a neuron with a vesicle and stuff, but there's nothing that looks like a good neuron. You want to draw your own neuron blob. This is how you can learn how to make the shapes, the custom shapes that you want. So hopefully you guys will have time to go through that later. But that's mostly what the pen and Bezier tool were. So just remember that if you go back to the node tool, you can go back and just readjust anything afterwards and get it just a little bit more refined and sharp. And the last thing I really want to go over was import export. So we've already imported images with this tool, but if you wanted to export, I'm just going to go back up to this main one. You can press 5 as well to center, move it back to the select tool. You can file. If you just save, it will save back as an SVG, a vector graphic image. And this will make sure that everything is editable. I have found out recently that save a copy means save as, it will shortcut you to save as PDF. So this is essentially how you export as a PDF. And if I remember right, PDF will actually export everything. So even though in this document, see this highlighted square, that is like the figure page. Oh, I should have began with that. So if you go to document properties, here you can set different sizes. So when I'm making figures, I always start out with a US letter sheet. But right now, if I'm making like just a custom, if I'm making a figure panel for an image, I want to make sure it fits on a page nicely. So I'll start out with a US letter. But if I'm making just like a tiny figure that's going to be put somewhere, it doesn't really matter. And you can custom size it. So you can even resize it to the content that you have selected here. But for me, what I did was I just highlighted this. And if I wanted, I wanted to make sure, I just resized it to the content here with a 10 pixel border around it. So when you export this as a PDF, it'll actually grab everything, all the objects that you have. So if you wanted to just export what you have here, you can do File, Export, PNG. And right now, it will export the selection. So I only have this. Exporting the page will actually do the same thing. So page will export anything within the special rectangle, and drawing will export any object you have within the whole file. In custom, you can be fancy and actually coordinate which rectangle you want. Yeah. So, So I think this was just some other activities if we had time, but I know we were running short today. For a lot of the images that you see online, they look quite raw. And some of the, when I have the opportunity to recreate these figures, some of the things that I will keep in mind is legibility, because to me, the font sizes are really small here. And I want to make them a little bit bigger so they're easy to see. I've made the rectangle, the arrows between them bigger, so it's clear the direction that they're going into. So this gives you the freedom to recreate some of the figures and make them a little bit better for your uses. And this was an example of how I use Inkscape in my research. So this is a placental villi, and I really liked this drawing, but I didn't want the rest of the image in my poster. So what I actually did was, I don't have the clip. What I did was I actually used a pen tool here, and I drew a custom shape around the villi, close that as an object, and use the set clip. So I clipped only that out. So if I do it really roughly, like I essentially just did this, but with a lot more care to make sure that I wrapped up all the edges. And then I select the new object or the new rectangle object that I made, shift, click on the original one. If I do set clip, it will clip out the overlap. So that's how I can make custom shapes or just clip out custom areas of a figure that I wanted to use as part of a bigger image. Are there any questions? So hopefully that was, I know it went really fast. I wanted to mostly just introduce you to the tools. You'll find that what you need to do in Inkscape, you'll probably have your own set of tools that will be most useful. But look for shorthands for it when you find the tools that you need. I really recommend trying to use Inkscape. I would recommend using it in like a smaller context first. Like don't dive in and just make a poster with it because it can be kind of overwhelming. I did also want to show you, this is one of the posters that I've made on Inkscape. And the reason why I like making it on Inkscape versus doing it on PowerPoint is I can make sure that these two rectangles, like this one and this one, are definitely like the exact same width. And because I have it laid out in panels of rectangles, I can get the actual number of pixels or the number of inches at the pages, and I can set it so that each of the rectangles are at a different coordinate. So you can see, for example, this guy here, he starts at 35 pixel and 35 height. And I know that the spacing between them is consistent. I know that the colors between them are consistent. To me, it's really about consistency and having control over where my objects are, and it makes for a very clean poster. And I can make sure that even color schemes between different objects are coordinated better than if I was trying to match it on PowerPoint. So thanks for bracing the cold and coming, guys.
Dream ideas of what they want to do, and maybe you can demonstrate.
Yeah.
You know, everyone have things that they want to be able to do, and maybe you want to ask if it's possible.
I know that was a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a ton of tutorials online.
There's a pretty big following behind Inkscape as an alternative for Illustrator.
Do you use layers much? Because I know it exists, and I know that people use it in Illustrator and all these things, but I never find myself actually using it much. Like, are there benefits to doing things with layers?
I do, and so I don't use it as often as I normally should, but like one of the applications that I do use layers for is if my layer is all these different nodes, and then I add a layer on top of it to group the nodes together. So then I can hide that depending on what I want to export. And because when I'm working with the original like nodes and edges, there's just too many that when I grab something, I'm always grabbing the wrong thing. And if I only want to work with the super clusters, and if I keep that on a different layer, then it keeps like the grabbing not conflicting. Yeah. Yeah. There's actually, I can't remember exactly how to do it, but one of the cool things I like about Inkscape as well is you can actually search by color or search by shape. So if you want to, yeah. So if you want to grab all your blue circles and change them all to the same shade of purple or something, you can actually just search by the color code. And I know you can't do that in PowerPoint. So that's for when I exported an old image in a very bad way. Rather than going back in to find out how I made that, I can just change it on Inkscape if it is an SVG file. If it's a vector file.